In 1973, some American families could stretch a dollar further than most people today can imagine, but even then, it was never quite enough. In quiet kitchens, far from television ads and grocery store promises, something unusual was happening. Mothers were turning the simplest ingredients into snacks that kept hunger away, just barely. Some of these foods were so common, almost every child remembers them, yet almost nobody talks about them now. Not because they were bad, but because they remind people of something uncomfortable. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe, because what you're about to remember might feel more real than you expect. Number 25, sugar bread. It sounds almost too simple to matter, and maybe that's why it has quietly disappeared. But in the early 1970s, this was more than just a snack. It was what you made when the kitchen felt empty, when dinner was still hours away, and when asking for something else wasn't really an option. A single slice of soft white bread, the kind that came in thin plastic wrapping and cost just a few cents per serving, laid flat on a plate. Margarine, whatever brand was cheapest that week, spread thick across the surface, reaching all the way to the edges. Then came the sugar. Not measured, not carefully sprinkled, but poured by instinct. Enough to coat the top in a thin, sparkling layer. What happened next was quiet but important. The sugar didn't just sit there. It began to soften where it touched the margarine, creating a texture that shifted between grainy and smooth with every bite. Sweet, fatty, and strangely comforting. No one wrote this recipe down. No one passed it through cookbooks. It existed only in memory, repeated in kitchens where budgets were tight and choices were limited. Children ate it standing at the counter, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, trying to make it last. It wasn't considered special. It was normal. Today, it might seem excessive, even embarrassing to admit. But back then, it was something else entirely. It was a small solution to a much bigger problem, and for a moment, it worked. Number 24, crackers with corn syrup. It wasn't something you'd ever find in a cookbook, and no one would have called it dessert out loud. But in the early 1970s, when the pantry felt limited and sweetness was hard to come by, this quiet combination showed up more often than people remember. A sleeve of plain saltine crackers, usually pulled from the back of a cabinet where they'd been sitting for days. A bottle of dark corn syrup, thick and slow-moving, poured carefully so it wouldn't spill. Just a small drizzle across each cracker, never too much. Stretching ingredients mattered. The syrup didn't stay on the surface for long. It slipped into the tiny holes, settling inside, turning each cracker into something heavier, stickier, and far sweeter than it had any right to be. The salt and the syrup met in a way that felt almost balanced, even if no one would have described it that way at the time. This wasn't a treat you showed to guests. It was something made quietly, usually in the late afternoon, when hunger started creeping in but dinner wasn't ready yet. Kids learned to make it themselves, standing on tiptoes near the counter, careful not to use too much. There was no pride attached to it. No memory of celebration. Just a simple understanding that this was enough for now. Today, it sounds unusual, maybe even unappealing. But for the families who relied on it, those crackers carried a kind of sweetness that went beyond taste, a small, temporary answer to an empty feeling that didn't always have a name. Number 23, fried bologna cups. There was a moment, usually sometime after school, when the house felt unusually quiet. No adults in the kitchen, no dinner started yet, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and whatever could be found inside it. That's where this snack began. A single slice of bologna, taken from a plastic package, slightly damp and pale. It went straight into a dry pan, set over medium heat. No oil, no butter, there wasn't always extra to spare. Then you waited. Within seconds, something changed. The flat slice began to tighten, the edges curling upward as the heat pushed through it. Slowly, it pulled itself into a shallow cup shape, holding its form as the surface darkened in spots. The smell filled the kitchen, salty, heavy, unmistakable. Some kids left it plain. Others added whatever was nearby. A small squeeze of ketchup. A line of mustard. Sometimes nothing at all. It didn't matter. The real moment was pulling it from the pan, too hot to handle, shifting it from hand to hand before taking that first bite. The edges had a slight crisp to them, but the center stayed soft, almost tender. It was simple, but it felt like something more than just leftovers. No one thought of it as cooking. It was just what you did when you were hungry and alone for a while. Now it's rarely made. Maybe because of what it was made from, or maybe because of what it quietly represents. Either way, it faded, leaving behind only the memory of that quiet kitchen and the sound of something slowly changing in the pan. Number 22, peanut butter and banana sandwiches. Long before it became something people talked about or associated with anyone famous, this was simply a practical solution hiding in plain sight. In many homes during the 1970s, these two ingredients were almost always there, waiting without much attention. A slice of white bread, sometimes two if there was enough. Peanut butter spread thick, not carefully, just enough to feel filling. Then a banana, peeled and sliced unevenly, pressed gently into the surface. The bread closed over it, soft against soft. At first bite, everything blended together in a way that felt surprisingly complete. The peanut butter was dense and slightly salty, the banana sweet and almost creamy. Together, they created something that felt heavier than it should have been, something that stayed with you longer than expected. Some kitchens took it a step further. A pan on low heat, a bit of butter melting slowly, the sandwich placed carefully inside. The outside turned golden, just enough to hold everything together. Inside, the banana softened even more, the peanut butter warming into something smoother, richer. It wasn't made to impress anyone. It wasn't even considered special. It was just reliable. Children ate it quickly, sometimes in silence, sometimes on their way out the door. It didn't demand attention, but it did its job. Today, it still exists, but something about it feels distant. Maybe because it no longer carries the same quiet purpose it once did, when simple combinations had to mean something more than just taste. Number 21, mayonnaise on white bread. It's the kind of thing people hesitate to admit now, often followed by a nervous laugh or a quick explanation. But in the 1970s, it wasn't strange at all. It was simply what you made when there was nothing else left to use. The refrigerator might have been running, but inside, it felt empty. No meat, no cheese, no leftovers wrapped in foil. Just a jar sitting on the door shelf, nearly always there. Two slices of soft white bread placed on the counter, side by side. The lid unscrewed, a knife dipped in, and a thick layer spread across each piece. There was no technique to it, no attempt to make it look appealing. Sometimes a pinch of salt, maybe a bit of black pepper if it was within reach. Then the slices pressed together, edges slightly uneven, the filling just enough to hold it in place. The first bite was quiet. Soft, slightly tangy, heavier than expected. The kind of texture that made you slow down, even if you hadn't planned to. It didn't excite. It didn't disappoint. It just existed in that moment, doing exactly what it needed to do. For many, this wasn't a choice. It was a solution. People didn't talk about it even back then. It carried a kind of silence with it, something understood but rarely spoken. And maybe that's why it faded so completely. Not because it was forgotten, but because some meals were never meant to be remembered out loud. Number 20, Vienna sausages straight from the can. Small, rubbery, and salty, they were the kind of snack that only a child could truly appreciate, the kind that felt like a tiny treasure pulled from the pantry in moments of quiet hunger. In 1975, a can cost less than 30 cents and contained 7 little sausages swimming in pale brine, a liquid that children sometimes drank without a second thought. The ritual began by peeling back the lid, the metal making a soft pop, releasing a faint tang that filled the kitchen. Fingers fished out one sausage at a time, the skin snapping lightly under a bite, the dense, salty meat filling the mouth. It wasn't fancy, but it had a satisfaction that stretched further than the dollar spent. One can might feed a child for a small afternoon, 2 cans might stretch to fill the needs of a family. No one wrote these snacks into cookbooks, and yet every working-class pantry had at least a few cans tucked away. They were a fallback, a quiet answer to hunger when there was nothing else ready. Some children ate them cold, others warmed them in a pan or simmered them briefly for a few seconds to bring out a slight change in texture, softening the brine and enhancing the flavor. Today, Vienna sausages still exist, but the experience is gone. There's no ritual, no small victory in peeling the lid and savoring the first snap. The memory lingers in those who grew up on them, a snack that demanded nothing and yet gave just enough to remind children, in a small but essential way, that hunger could be held at bay, if only for a few moments. Number 19, potted meat on crackers. It was never glamorous, and it certainly didn't appear in magazines, but for countless American children in the 1970s, it was a reliable snack, one that bridged the gap between hunger and the next meal. The tin was small and unassuming, often silver with a simple label that offered no hint of the ritual about to unfold. At 19 cents a tin in 1972, it was cheap, but it delivered more than just nourishment. It offered a brief sense of fullness and satisfaction. A few saltine crackers were arranged on a plate or napkin. The lid of the potted meat tin was pried back, revealing a dense, spreadable paste, smoky and salty with a slight tang. Using a butter knife, children, or sometimes their mothers, spread a modest portion across the cracker's surface. Sometimes, a squirt of yellow mustard added a sharp contrast, cutting through the richness. Each bite was salty, savory, and strangely satisfying in a way that seemed disproportionate to its humble ingredients. No one measured. No one fretted over presentation. The snack was about function first, flavor second. Yet in its simplicity lay a kind of quiet ritual, the scraping of the tin, the even spreading, the small satisfaction of seeing a snack completed and consumed. This snack faded not because it lacked taste or practicality, but because its world changed. As lunch meats became more expensive and convenience foods rose in popularity, potted meat lost its place in American homes. And yet, for those who remember, the experience lingers. The texture, the aroma, the way the salty paste met the crisp cracker. It was a small, private victory, a way to feel fed when options were scarce, and it's that memory which keeps number 19 alive in the minds of anyone who grew up on it. Number 18, bread and milk. It was the kind of snack that didn't feel like a snack at all, yet it carried comfort in every bite. In many 1970s households, especially in the South and Midwest, this was what children turned to when nothing else was ready. Simple, humble, and surprisingly filling. Stale white bread, torn into irregular chunks, went straight into a bowl. Warm whole milk poured over the top, soaking the pieces just enough to soften them without turning them to mush. A spoonful of sugar added sweetness, and in some households, a pinch of salt balanced the flavor. In the Midwest, buttermilk sometimes replaced regular milk, tangy and slightly thick, giving the dish a subtle complexity. Children ate it like soup or cereal, spoonful by spoonful, sometimes standing at the counter or sitting quietly at the table. It was a snack that required nothing more than patience and a small measure of care. There was no pretense, no celebration, just sustenance and the quiet comfort of knowing that something simple could make a moment feel complete. The cost was minimal. A loaf of bread ran less than 30 cents, a half-gallon of milk around 65 cents. Yet the value it offered went far beyond numbers. The warmth, the texture, and the ability to stave off hunger carried a sense of security that processed snacks could never replicate. Bread and milk may seem unimaginative today, but in 1970s kitchens, it was quietly heroic. It transformed ordinary ingredients into a small ritual of survival, a testament to resourcefulness, and a reminder that even the simplest acts, tearing bread, pouring milk, could bring comfort and nourishment when life demanded it most. Number 17, cinnamon sugar toast. In the 1970s, this wasn't a fancy treat. It was a quick fix, a small comfort when the day felt long or the pantry looked bare. Mothers and children alike knew exactly how to make it, and the ritual itself mattered as much as the taste. A slice of soft white bread was buttered generously on one side. Then came the sugar and cinnamon mixture. Always more sugar than cinnamon, usually 4-1. The sprinkle wasn't measured precisely. It was guided by memory, by the feel of the mixture in hand, the glint of sugar catching the light. The slice went under the broiler for exactly 90 seconds. Watching it carefully was crucial. 1 second too long, and the edges burned. 1 second too short, and the sugar never caramelized. The brief wait built anticipation. When it came out, the aroma filled the kitchen, warm, sweet, and slightly spicy. The sugar had melted into the butter, forming a thin, crisp layer at the edges while the center remained soft and gooey. Each bite offered a contrast of textures, the crunch of the caramelized edges, the tenderness of the bread beneath. It was a snack that felt intentional despite its simplicity. For children, cinnamon sugar toast was more than just taste. It was a lesson in patience, a moment to pause, and a reminder that small acts of care could transform humble ingredients into something memorable. It required attention, timing, and a gentle hand, and in return, it delivered a brief, delicious reward. Today, the snack is mostly forgotten. Modern kitchens rarely take the 90 seconds necessary, and few remember the subtle magic that came from watching sugar meet heat, butter, and bread, creating a memory that lingered long after the last bite. Number 16, crackers with peanut butter and a single raisin on top. It was the kind of snack that felt both deliberate and spontaneous, a small masterpiece made from what was already on hand. In the 1970s, this simple combination appeared in school cafeterias, church basements, and kitchens across America, unremarkable to adults, but magical to children. A Ritz cracker, crisp and slightly salty, became the base. A generous smear of peanut butter followed, spread carefully to the edges. Then came the finishing touch, a single raisin placed precisely in the center. That small dot transformed a basic bite into something complete. Children understood the power of that tiny addition. Without it, it was merely a cracker and peanut butter, but with it, the snack felt finished, intentional, even special. The economics were simple. A box of crackers cost a few cents, a jar of peanut butter lasted weeks, and raisins added just a fraction of a cent per serving. For $1.39, a family could produce dozens of these treats. They were affordable, accessible, and required almost no preparation, yet they carried a sense of care. No one wrote this recipe down, yet almost every child knew exactly how to assemble it. The tactile act of spreading, pressing, and placing the raisin became part of the experience. Eating it was slow and deliberate, the sweet chew of the raisin contrasting against the creamy peanut butter and crisp cracker. Today, the snack is largely forgotten. The ritual is gone, replaced by pre-packaged convenience. But for those who grew up on it, the memory remains vivid, the small act of creation, the simple pleasure of combining textures and flavors, and the quiet satisfaction that came from turning ordinary pantry staples into something extraordinary. These 10 forgotten snacks from the 1970s weren't about luxury, they were about creativity, resourcefulness, and the simple joy of eating something made with what was on hand. From sugar bread to fried bologna cups, each bite tells a story of quiet kitchens, tight budgets, and the clever solutions families invented to keep children fed and happy. These treats may have vanished from modern pantries, but their memory lingers, reminding us that flavor, comfort, and ingenuity often go hand in hand. Try one yourself this week, and rediscover a small piece of American culinary history that refuses to be forgotten.